Have you heard what happened to Ron Howard? For generations of Americans, Ron Howard represents the quintessential success story in Hollywood, the child actor who seamlessly transitioned to respected director, avoiding the pitfalls that claimed so many young stars while building one of the industry's most impressive careers. From Opie Taylor to Richie Cunningham to Academy Award-winning filmmaker, Howard's journey seems to embody the American dream: talent, hard work, and decency rewarded with extraordinary success. But behind this carefully maintained public image of the affable baseball cap-wearing director lies a more complex reality that Howard has only recently begun to discuss openly. The man who brought us Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, and Parenthood has experienced moments of profound personal crisis, career-threatening failure, and painful self-doubt that contrast sharply with his reputation as Hollywood's most reliable hitmaker. People think they know Ron because he's been in their living room since he was 6 years old, revealed a longtime colleague who has worked on multiple Howard productions, but there's a depth to him and struggles he's faced that would surprise most people. He's maintained this image of the consummate professional who has it all figured out, but the reality is much more human and complicated. In recent interviews and his memoir, Howard has begun addressing these hidden chapters of his life with surprising candor, discussing family crises, career setbacks, and moments of profound personal regret that shaped his life and work in ways the public never saw. These revelations paint a picture not of the infallible success story, but of a man who has grappled with the same difficult choices, painful mistakes, and personal losses as anyone else, despite his extraordinary professional achievements. Ron's built his career on telling other people's stories, noted a veteran producer who has collaborated with Howard for decades. What's remarkable is how long he managed to keep his own story, with all its complications and contradictions, private. The image of the happy-go-lucky director with the charmed life was convenient shorthand, but it never captured the real man or the real struggles. Today, we explore 5 pivotal moments in Ron Howard's life that reveal the man behind the familiar public persona, moments of crisis, regret, and transformation that shaped his journey far more profoundly than the accolades and box office successes that define his public legacy. Behind Ron Howard's steady rise from child actor to Oscar-winning director lies a more nuanced personal journey marked by difficult sacrifices, professional setbacks, and private struggles that have largely remained hidden from public view. What makes these revelations particularly compelling is how they contradict the seemingly effortless success story Howard has represented in the public imagination for decades. The man who appeared to transition seamlessly from acting to directing, from television to film, from commercial entertainment to artistic achievement, has in fact navigated the same complex terrain of work-life balance, family obligations, health challenges, and career disappointments as anyone else, albeit on a more visible stage. Howard's willingness to finally discuss these challenging chapters offers a more complete portrait of a filmmaker whose personal experiences have profoundly influenced his storytelling, revealing the authentic human being behind the familiar baseball cap and affable demeanor that have become his professional trademark.
I learned cursive writing in order to do autographs when I was 6 years old.
The Price of Ambition, the 1991 decision he regrets deeply. In 1991, Ron Howard stood at a pivotal moment in his directorial career. After establishing himself with comedies like Splash and Parenthood, and proving his dramatic chops with Cocoon and Backdraft, he was poised to make his most ambitious film yet, Far and Away, a sweeping historical epic starring Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. The production would require 6 months of filming in Ireland and Montana, representing Howard's most logistically complex project and a significant step toward establishing himself as a filmmaker capable of handling any genre. What made this professional opportunity particularly challenging was its timing. Howard's wife Cheryl had recently given birth to their daughter Jocelyn, the couple's 4th child. Taking on Far and Away meant missing crucial months of his youngest daughter's early development, a sacrifice Howard made in pursuit of his directorial ambitions. Left for 6 months to film Far and Away, noted entertainment journalist Rebecca Santos, who has covered Howard's career for decades, it was a critical juncture for him professionally. The film represented a significant budget increase and a chance to work with the biggest star in Hollywood at that time. Turning it down wasn't really an option in his mind if he wanted to continue ascending as a filmmaker. Howard approached the separation with characteristic thoroughness, setting up regular phone calls and arranging for his family to visit the set when possible. But as the production stretched on, complicated by weather delays, logistical challenges, and the inherent complexities of period filmmaking, the personal cost of his absence became increasingly apparent. Missed his daughter's baby years, Santos continued. When you're directing a film of that scale, you're not just physically absent, you're mentally and emotionally consumed 24/7. Even during brief visits home or when his family came to set, he couldn't fully engage. He was responsible for a massive production with hundreds of people and millions of dollars riding on his decisions. When Howard finally returned home after completing the film, the impact of his extended absence hit him with unexpected force. According to his own later recollections, he came back to a family that had adapted to life without him, particularly his infant daughter, who showed no recognition of her father and treated him like a stranger. Came home to a changed family and realized the cost of his career, explained Dr. James Peterson, a psychologist who studies work-life balance issues among high-achieving professionals. This is actually a common experience for parents who travel extensively for work, but it can be particularly jarring when it involves a baby, who develops and changes so rapidly in those early months. Missing 6 months of an infant's life means missing fundamental developmental milestones and bonding opportunities. According to Howard's own accounts in recent interviews, this homecoming represented a profound wake-up call, a moment when the abstract concept of work-life balance suddenly became painfully concrete. His daughter's lack of recognition forced him to confront the reality that his professional achievements came with personal costs that couldn't simply be managed away with good intentions and careful planning. That moment haunted him for decades, noted a longtime colleague. Ron is someone who values family deeply. It's evident in his films, which often explore family dynamics with remarkable nuance. Realizing he had effectively chosen career advancement over being present for his daughter's early months created a kind of cognitive dissonance for him. He'd always seen himself as a family man first, but his actions in this case told a different story. The experience became a turning point in how Howard approached subsequent projects, influencing decisions about which films to direct and how to structure productions. While he continued to work steadily throughout the 1990s and beyond, he became more strategic about scheduling, more willing to fight for production arrangements that accommodated his family needs, and more conscious of maintaining his presence in his children's lives, despite the all-consuming nature of directing. After Far and Away, he started bringing his kids into his work world more intentionally, explained Santos. His son Reed would visit sets and eventually developed his own interest in filmmaking. His daughter, Bryce Dallas Howard, has spoken about how her father would include her in aspects of his work from a young age. It was as if he'd realized he couldn't always prevent work from taking him away from family, so he would bring family into his work whenever possible. This integration of family and filmmaking became something of a Howard trademark in subsequent years, with his wife Cheryl visiting virtually every set and his children frequently involved in various aspects of his productions. What began as a response to a painful realization evolved into a distinctive approach to balancing the demands of a high-powered directing career with his commitment to family life. The irony of Howard's experience with Far and Away is that the film, which represented such a significant professional gamble and personal sacrifice, ultimately underperformed both critically and commercially. After all the missed bedtimes and milestones, the production that had seemed worth the sacrifice didn't deliver the career advancement Howard had anticipated, adding another dimension to his sense of regret. That moment haunted him for decades. This simple statement captures the lasting impact of what might seem like a routine career decision from the outside for Howard. The realization that his professional ambition had cost him irreplaceable personal experiences created a wound that time didn't fully heal. A constant reminder of the trade-offs inherent in pursuing excellence in a demanding field while trying to remain present for the people who matter most.
Yeah, once in a while, but I had denied. I didn't do it. I denied.
Pretty good batting average of getting...
Brotherly Burden, the hidden family crisis with his brother Clint. While Ron Howard's transition from child actor to acclaimed director represents one of Hollywood's great success stories, his younger brother Clint followed a far more troubled path, one that created profound family challenges largely hidden from public view. Though both brothers began as child actors, their diverging fortunes created complex dynamics that culminated in a family crisis during the early 1990s. Clint, also a child actor, fell into addiction in the 80s, explained entertainment journalist Thomas Henderson, who has covered the Howard family for decades. While Ron was directing hit films and building his production company, Clint was struggling with substance abuse issues that gradually consumed his life. Their parallel careers had veered in dramatically different directions, creating a painful contrast that affected the entire family. Clint Howard established himself as a working character actor with appearances in numerous films and television shows, including many of his brother's productions. But behind his steady employment lay increasingly serious addiction issues that began to threaten both his career and his health by the late 1980s. According to those close to the family, Ron found himself in the difficult position of watching his brother's decline while being unable to intervene effectively. The same focus and determination that made Ron successful as a director proved frustrating when applied to his brother's addiction, a problem that couldn't be solved through careful planning or hard work. Ron gave him an ultimatum in 1990. Rehab or lose him, noted Henderson. This wasn't just professional concern. It was a desperate attempt to save his brother's life. By that point, Clint's addiction had progressed to a potentially life-threatening stage, and conventional expressions of concern had proven ineffective. The ultimatum represented a turning point for both brothers. For Clint, it initiated a recovery process that would eventually lead to sobriety. For Ron, it forced a confrontation with feelings of helplessness and guilt that had been building for years as he witnessed his brother's struggles. Guilt lingered. Ron admitted his own success made Clint feel left behind, explained Dr. Lisa Montgomery, a psychologist specializing in family dynamics. This is actually quite common in families where siblings experience dramatically different levels of success. Even without anyone intentionally creating comparisons, they naturally emerge, creating complex emotional responses on both sides. In interviews years later, Ron acknowledged that his achievements cast a long shadow over his brother, creating implicit comparisons that may have contributed to Clint's difficulties. Though Ron never flaunted his success or deliberately highlighted the contrast between their careers, the simple reality of his prominent position in Hollywood created a challenging context for his younger brother. It's the classic survivor's guilt scenario, observed Montgomery. Ron didn't do anything wrong by succeeding, but he nonetheless felt responsible for how his success might have affected his brother. This created a complex emotional burden he carried largely in private, even as he maintained his public image as the affable, uncomplicated director. What makes this family crisis particularly significant in understanding Ron Howard is how it contradicts the public perception of his charmed life and straightforward rise to success. While audiences saw the former child star smoothly transitioning to acclaimed filmmaker, Howard was privately grappling with a painful family situation that defied his problem-solving abilities and challenged his self-image as someone who could overcome any obstacle through persistence and hard work. When you look at Ron's films during and after this period, you can see how these experiences informed his storytelling, noted film critic Michael Barnes. Movies like Parenthood and A Beautiful Mind demonstrate remarkable empathy for family struggles and mental health challenges. They reflect a depth of understanding that comes from personal experience rather than academic research. The brothers' relationship eventually evolved into something healthier as Clint maintained his sobriety and continued his acting career, frequently appearing in Ron's films in small but memorable roles. But according to those close to the family, the experience left a lasting mark on Ron, deepening his understanding of human frailty and the limits of individual control over others' choices. Guilt lingered. Ron admitted his own success made Clint feel left behind. This simple statement captures the emotional complexity that existed beneath Ron Howard's carefully maintained public image. The recognition that his own extraordinary achievements cast shadows as well as light, creating unintended consequences for those closest to him that no amount of good intentions could prevent.
It's actually not, those were all challenging fires in Backdraft, but there was one that's...
Physical breakdown. The collapse of his body on Apollo 13. In 1995, Ron Howard embarked on what would become one of his most acclaimed films, Apollo 13, the true story of the near-disastrous 1970 moon mission that became a testament to human ingenuity and courage. The production represented Howard's most technically challenging project to date, requiring innovative solutions to create realistic zero-gravity effects and accurately depict the complex workings of spacecraft and mission control. Howard approached the project with characteristic thoroughness, immersing himself in NASA history and space technology while working closely with former astronauts and mission controllers to ensure accuracy. What began as meticulous preparation evolved into a consuming obsession with getting every detail right, leading Howard to push himself beyond reasonable physical limits. After 90 straight days of 18-hour shoots, Ron collapsed on set, revealed a crew member who worked on the production. It wasn't just fatigue. His body literally shut down after months of running on adrenaline, minimal sleep, and pure determination. One minute he was giving direction, the next he was on the floor, unable to continue. The collapse occurred during the final weeks of an already extended shooting schedule. According to multiple sources familiar with the situation, Howard had been ignoring increasingly serious warning signs, including dizziness, exhaustion, and difficulty concentrating, in his determination to complete the film on schedule and to his exacting standards. The physical and mental cost of perfection finally caught up with him, explained Dr. Robert Jenkins, who specializes in occupational health issues in high-stress industries. The filmmaking process, particularly at the director level, creates a perfect storm of stress factors, enormous financial pressure, creative challenges, management responsibilities, and often physical demands, including sleep deprivation and irregular schedules. The human body can compensate for a while, but eventually something gives. The severity of Howard's collapse forced an unprecedented pause in production on a major studio film. Medical professionals who examined him diagnosed extreme exhaustion, complicated by dehydration, and warned that continuing without rest could lead to more serious health consequences. The crew had to shut down production for 36 hours, noted the crew member. In an industry where time literally equals millions of dollars, this was extraordinary. It speaks to how serious his condition was. They wouldn't have stopped otherwise, given the pressure to complete the film within budget constraints. For Howard, who had built his reputation on professionalism and reliability, this physical breakdown represented a profound personal failure. According to those close to him, he experienced not just physical symptoms, but a kind of existential crisis, forced to confront the limits of his endurance and the unsustainability of his approach to filmmaking. Ron's entire identity was built around being the guy who could handle anything, who never lost control, never cracked under pressure, observed a longtime colleague. Having his body literally fail him in the middle of his most important film to date was more than just physically frightening. It was a fundamental challenge to how Ron's entire identity was built around being the guy who could handle anything, who never lost control, never cracked under pressure, observed a longtime colleague. Having his body literally fail him in the middle of his most important film to date was more than just physically frightening. It was a fundamental challenge to how he saw himself as a filmmaker and a person. The forced rest period became a rare moment of reflection for Howard, who had maintained an almost continuous work schedule since childhood, transitioning directly from his acting career to directing without significant breaks. According to those who spoke with him during this time, he began questioning the sustainability of his approach to filmmaking and the personal costs of his perfectionism. "It was the first time I ever heard Ron acknowledge that maybe his way wasn't working," recalled a producer associated with the film. "He'd always been the consummate professional who made everything look effortless. Suddenly he was facing the reality that his body and mind had limits that no amount of determination could overcome." When production resumed, Howard adopted a marginally more balanced approach, delegating more responsibility to his experienced team and allowing himself occasional rest periods. But the fundamental lessons of this physical breakdown would take years to fully integrate into his working methods. Apollo 13 went on to become both a critical and commercial success, earning 9 Academy Award nominations and confirming Howard's status as a director capable of handling complex, technically demanding material. Ironically, the film that nearly broke him physically became one of his defining achievements, perhaps because the struggle to complete it mirrored the against-all-odds story it portrayed. The experience changed how he approached subsequent projects, noted Jenkins. Not dramatically, he remained an exceptionally hard-working, detail-oriented director, but those who worked with him before and after Apollo 13 described subtle but important differences in how he paced himself and how he related to his physical needs. He became more strategic about when to push and when to rest. This physical collapse represented a pivotal moment in Howard's personal development, a forced recognition of human limitation that contradicted the ethos of unwavering determination that had defined his career since childhood. The man who had never missed a day of work, who prided himself on meeting every challenge through sheer persistence, had to acknowledge a more complex reality, that sometimes the greatest professional strength lies in recognizing and respecting personal limits.
Last, I had the opportunity to just sort of look and see what these actors were doing with these characters, and I thought it was fantastic.
Career crisis, the bomb that almost ended his career. By 2018, Ron Howard had directed over 25 feature films, won 2 Academy Awards, and established himself as one of Hollywood's most reliable filmmakers, equally comfortable with intimate dramas, big-budget adventures, and everything in between. His career seemed virtually bulletproof, having weathered changing industry trends and occasional commercial disappointments without losing his standing as a top-tier director. Then came Solo: A Star Wars Story, a production that would challenge Howard in unprecedented ways and create the most serious career crisis of his professional life. Solo: A Star Wars Story was a nightmare, explained entertainment reporter Rebecca Santos. What most audiences don't realize is that Howard wasn't the original director. He was brought in as an emergency replacement after Lucasfilm fired directors Phil Lord and Christopher Miller more than halfway through production, an almost unheard of move on a film of this scale. Howard faced a nearly impossible situation, stepping into a partially completed $275 million movie tied to one of cinema's most beloved franchises, with a release date that couldn't be moved and a studio in crisis mode. The challenge would have been daunting for any director, but for Howard, who had built his reputation on preparation, control, and methodical execution, it represented a particularly uncomfortable scenario. He reshot 70% of it after replacing the original directors, noted a Lucasfilm insider familiar with the production. This wasn't just tweaking or refining what had already been shot. It was essentially making a completely different movie using some of the same sets and actors, but with a radically different approach and tone. And he had to do it in a fraction of the time usually allocated for a film of this size. Howard approached the challenge with characteristic professionalism, working around the clock to reimagine and reshoot the troubled production. According to those on set, he never complained about the difficult circumstances or criticized the previous director's work, instead focusing entirely on the task at hand, salvaging a troubled production and delivering a film that could satisfy both the studio and the notoriously passionate Star Wars fan base. Despite these heroic efforts, Solo became the first Star Wars film to lose money, grossing just under $400 million worldwide against its bloated budget and massive marketing costs. Critics offered mixed reviews, and audience turnout fell far below expectations for a film connected to one of cinema's most reliable franchises. The film flopped. Ron later said it nearly ended his directing career. Santos continued, "This wasn't just a minor disappointment or an artistic failure. It was a high-profile commercial disaster attached to a beloved franchise, with Howard's name prominently featured as director. In an industry increasingly focused on financial returns over artistic merit, this kind of failure can permanently damage even an established director's career. For Howard, the experience represented a profound professional crisis. According to those close to him, he questioned whether his filmmaking approach had become outdated in a rapidly changing industry, whether his instincts could still be trusted, and whether studios would continue to entrust him with major projects after such a high-profile failure. There was a period after Solo where the phone just wasn't ringing the way it used to," revealed a longtime colleague. Ron had built a career on being the safe pair of hands you could trust with any material and any budget. Suddenly that reputation was in question, and he found himself in unfamiliar territory, having to actively pursue projects rather than selecting from multiple offers. This career uncertainty coincided with Howard entering his mid-60s, an age when many directors begin facing industry ageism and questions about their relevance to contemporary audiences. The combination of commercial failure and natural career evolution created what Howard has described as a period of profound professional soul-searching. Bryce Dallas Howard was the one who pulled him back, explained Santos, referring to Ron's daughter, who had established herself as an accomplished director in her own right with episodes of The Mandalorian and other projects. According to Ron's own accounts, Bryce helped him navigate this difficult period by encouraging him to reconnect with his original love of storytelling rather than focusing on commercial expectations or industry perception. This guidance from his daughter, reversing the traditional parent-child mentorship dynamic, helped Howard reorient himself professionally and emotionally. Rather than trying to recapture past success or chase current trends, he began seeking projects that genuinely excited his creative interests, regardless of their commercial potential or industry prestige. The solo experience forced Ron to confront questions about artistic identity and purpose that many directors never have to face because their careers don't last long enough, observed film critic Michael Barnes. Having achieved everything possible in conventional terms, commercial success, critical acclaim, industry awards, he suddenly had to decide what filmmaking meant to him beyond external validation and financial rewards. The crisis ultimately proved transformative, leading Howard toward projects that represented creative risks rather than safe choices. His subsequent work, including the documentary Rebuilding Paradise and the adaptation of Hillbilly Elegy, reflected a filmmaker less concerned with commercial expectations and more focused on telling stories that personally resonated, regardless of their marketplace potential. Bryce Dallas Howard was the one who pulled him back. This simple statement captures a poignant role reversal. The daughter who had grown up watching her father navigate Hollywood's complexities, now helping him find his way through his most significant professional crisis, offering wisdom and perspective when he needed it most. The man who had spent decades mentoring young filmmakers found himself being guided by the next generation, completing a circle that brought both humility and renewal at a critical juncture in his storied career.
It's not that Andy wrote, he wasn't didn't have a producer credit, but it was his show. It was
Private Pain, the personal grief no one knew about. In 2017, while maintaining his typically busy professional schedule, Ron Howard experienced a series of personal losses that profoundly affected him but remained largely hidden from public view. Within a span of months, he lost both his father, Rance Howard, a veteran actor who had been a constant presence throughout Ron's life and career, and his mother-in-law, creating a period of intense grief that coincided with one of his most emotionally demanding projects. Lost both his father, Rance, and mother-in-law within months in 2017, noted a family friend. These weren't just ordinary losses. Both relationships were foundational to Ron's identity and support system. Rance had been not just a father, but a professional mentor, appearing in many of Ron's films and providing a link to his earliest experiences in the industry. His mother-in-law had been part of his life since he was a teenager, as he and Cheryl have been together since high school. The timing of these losses proved particularly challenging as Howard was simultaneously working on Rebuilding Paradise, a documentary about the devastating 2018 Camp Fire that destroyed the town of Paradise, California. The film required Howard to immerse himself in the grief and trauma of an entire community while privately processing his own losses, creating an emotional resonance that influenced his approach to the material in ways he only later came to fully recognize. Filmed Rebuilding Paradise, a documentary about wildfire destruction while still grieving, explained producer Mark Monroe, who collaborated with Howard on the documentary. There was an extraordinary parallel process happening. Ron interviewing people about the most traumatic experiences of their lives while carrying his own fresh grief. He never made it about himself or drew explicit connections, but those of us working closely with him could see how the material affected him differently than it might have at another time in his life. According to those familiar with the production, Howard approached the documentary subjects with unusual emotional openness, listening to their stories of loss and resilience with a depth of empathy that reflected his own recent experiences. Rather than maintaining the professional distance directors sometimes adopt when handling sensitive material, he allowed himself to be visibly moved by the survivors' testimonies. He called it the hardest project I ever made, Monroe continued, not because of logistical challenges or technical complexity, but because of the emotional weight of the material and how it intersected with his own grief. There were days when we'd finish interviewing Paradise residents about losing everything, and you could see that Ron was carrying not just their stories, but his own losses as well. What made this period particularly challenging was Howard's lifelong tendency to compartmentalize, separating his professional responsibilities from his personal experiences. According to those who know him well, this ability to maintain focus regardless of personal circumstances had been a defining characteristic since his childhood acting days. The confluence of professional demands and profound personal losses in 2017 tested this compartmentalization in unprecedented ways. Ron has always been the guy who shows up ready to work no matter what's happening in his personal life, observed a longtime colleague. That's been his approach since he was a kid on set. The show goes on, and personal matters stay personal. But there are times when that separation isn't entirely possible, when the personal bleeds into the professional, despite your best efforts to maintain boundaries. For Howard, Rebuilding Paradise became that boundary-crossing experience, a project where his professional role as documentarian became inextricably linked with his personal journey through grief. The resulting film reflects this intersection, demonstrating a raw emotional honesty, somewhat different from Howard's typically more controlled approach to storytelling. He called it the hardest project I ever made. This simple statement encompasses both the professional challenges of documenting a community's devastation and the personal challenge of doing so while navigating his own losses, a rare acknowledgement from a filmmaker who has typically emphasized the craft of filmmaking over its emotional costs. The man who built his reputation on reliability and professionalism found himself making his most personally vulnerable work at a moment of profound private pain, creating a documentary that stands apart from his feature films precisely because of this emotional transparency.